There is a particular kind of darkness that comes with being entombed in a dreadnought sarcophagus. It's not the simple absence of light that mortals experience when they close their eyes at night. It's not even the void of unconsciousness that claims them when they sleep. No, this darkness is something altogether more profound, more consuming, more absolute. It is the darkness of a consciousness suspended between existence and oblivion, a mind kept alive by machines, but denied the anchors of sensory experience that make existence real. When the systems shut down and the ancient warrior is returned to his long sleep, there is no gentle drift into dreams. There is only the sudden, complete cessation of being. Imagine, if you can, existing as nothing more than thought without sensation. No warmth, no cold, no pain, no pleasure. No sight, no sound, no taste, no smell, no touch. Nothing but the fading echo of your last conscious moment, reverberating through the empty halls of your mind, until even that fades into the black. Some dreadnoughts report experiencing visions during their sleep, fragments of memory playing out in endless loops, battles fought centuries ago, replaying with perfect clarity, even as the context around them dissolves into meaningless static. Others claim to feel the passage of time as a physical weight, each year adding to an invisible burden that presses down upon their suspended consciousness like layers of sediment burying ancient ruins. But most simply cease. They close their eyes in one moment and open them in another, with no sense of the decades or centuries that have passed in between. For the ancient warrior sealed within the adamantium shell, time becomes a strange and fluid thing. The perception of duration warps and twists. A battle that raged for hours might feel like it happened moments ago, while a conversation from the previous awakening might seem like a half-remembered dream from someone else's life. The human mind, even one enhanced by the gene seed of a Primarch and hardened by centuries of warfare, was never meant to experience time in this fractured, discontinuous way. Sleep and waking for mortals are part of a daily rhythm that helps anchor consciousness to reality. But for a dreadnought, there is no rhythm. There are only discrete moments of awareness separated by unknowable gulfs of non-existence. The tech priests who maintain these walking tombs speak of the machine spirits that inhabit the ancient chassis, of the sacred rituals required to ensure smooth activation and deactivation. They chant their binary prayers and anoint the sacred mechanisms with blessed unguents, believing that proper reverence will ease the warrior's transition between states of being. And perhaps they are right in their way. Perhaps the rituals do help, providing a familiar framework that helps the entombed mind orient itself when consciousness returns. Or perhaps the rituals are more for the living than the dead, a way for those who remain to feel they are doing something meaningful for brothers who have sacrificed everything. The dreams, when they come, are strange and terrible things. Some dreadnoughts report seeing visions of battles yet to come, prophecies granted by whatever connection still exists between their organic brain and the Imperium realm that lies beyond reality. Others find themselves reliving moments from their mortal life with painful clarity, remembering the sensation of skin against skin, the taste of food, the simple pleasure of breathing air into lungs they no longer possess. These memories can be a comfort or a torture, depending on the warrior's disposition. Some cling to them desperately, using them as anchors to remind themselves of who they once were. Others try to let them fade, believing that holding on to the past only makes the present more unbearable. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of dreadnought sleep is the complete loss of agency. When a mortal goes to sleep, they do so by choice, lying down in a safe place and allowing their body's natural processes to take over. They know, on some level, that they will wake again in a few hours, refreshed and ready to face a new day. A dreadnought has no such certainty. When the tech priests initiate the shutdown sequence, the ancient warrior has no choice but to yield to it, feeling their consciousness slip away like water through grasping fingers. They do not know if they will ever wake again. They do not know if their chassis will fail during the long sleep, or if the chapter will simply decide that their service is no longer required. They do not know if the next battle will be in a month, a year, a decade, or a century. They surrender control completely, placing their fate in the hands of others and hoping that they will be deemed worthy of resurrection when the time comes. This, then, is what it means to be a dreadnought. To exist in moments stolen from the endless dark, to wage war with weapons that respond to thought as if they were limbs, to watch the world change and evolve while you remain frozen, unchanging, a relic from an age that grows more distant with each awakening. The chapters who maintain these ancient warriors treat them with the reverence due to living legends, consulting them for tactical wisdom and historical knowledge. But that reverence comes at a price. The dreadnought is no longer truly one of their brothers. He is something else, something set apart, something both more and less than what he once was. He is a weapon, a monument, and a warning all at once. A reminder of what sacrifice truly means in the service of the Emperor of mankind. The void between moments. The last thing the ancient warrior remembers before the darkness claims him is the voice of the tech marine, speaking in soothing tones through the Vox link that connects directly to what remains of his biological brain. Words of gratitude, perhaps, or assurances that his service has been noted and valued. Sometimes there are promises that his rest will be peaceful, that he will be awakened only when truly needed. These words become more hollow with each repetition, as both speaker and listener know the truth. There is no peace in the depths of a sarcophagus, only absence, and the warrior will be awakened whenever the chapter deems it necessary, whether that is tomorrow or 1,000 years hence. The shutdown sequence begins with the external systems first. The targeting matrices fade. The weapon feeds cease their constant readiness reports. The sensory clusters that provide sight and sound and tactical awareness begin to dim one by one. For a moment, the consciousness within experiences a sensation not unlike drowning, as the connections that make him feel like part of the war machine are severed one after another. The dreadnought chassis does not cease to exist, of course. It remains standing in the sacred halls of the chapter's fortress monastery, a silent sentinel waiting for the call to war. But from the perspective of the warrior within, the world simply stops. Some describe it as falling, an endless tumble through empty space, with no reference points and no hope of landing. Others compare it to being buried alive, aware of the weight of centuries pressing down from above, but unable to move or cry out. A few claim to maintain some form of awareness during their sleep, existing as a tiny spark of consciousness adrift in an infinite dark, counting the moments until they can return to the world of light and war and purpose. But these accounts are rare, and many tech priests believe they are simply false memories created by a mind struggling to cope with the absolute discontinuity of dreadnought existence. The truth is that no one really knows what happens in the depths of that long sleep. The organic components of a dreadnought's brain show minimal activity during stasis, barely enough to register on the most sensitive medical auspex. The life support systems maintain the bare minimum necessary to keep the tissues alive and prevent degradation, but there is no way to measure subjective experience, no scanner that can peer into the locked room of consciousness and report what it finds there. The warrior goes in, and the warrior comes out, and what happens in between remains a mystery even to those who experience it. But the sleep is not entirely devoid of content. Deep in the liminal spaces between full consciousness and complete oblivion, things can stir. Memories surface unbidden, fragments of experiences from centuries or millennia past playing out in the darkness like half-remembered dreams. A face from the past, a brother whose name has been forgotten, but whose features remain somehow familiar. The sound of bolter fire echoing across a battlefield whose name no longer exists in any record. The sensation of standing on solid ground with legs of flesh and bone, feeling the weight of power armor pressing down on shoulders that no longer exist in any physical sense. These sense memories float through the dark like debris in a void, untethered from context or meaning, and the sleeping consciousness grasps at them desperately, trying to hold on to something, anything, that feels real. Sometimes the dreams take on a more coherent form. The warrior finds himself walking through the halls of his chapter's fortress monastery, as it was in his youth, when he was still flesh and blood, and the galaxy seemed full of possibility rather than endless war. He sees his brother Marines as they were then, young and vital, laughing and training and planning campaigns against enemies that seemed less incomprehensible than those they face now. He remembers the weight of his bolter in his hands, the way his hearts would race before a drop pod assault, the fierce joy of combat, when everything else fell away, and there was only the mission and the enemy, and the bond between brothers who would die for each other without hesitation. But these dreams always sour. The faces of his brothers begin to blur and fade, their features becoming indistinct as the centuries erode even the clearest memories. The halls of the fortress monastery shift and change, architecture from different eras of the chapter's history bleeding into one another until nothing looks quite right. The warrior reaches out to touch something solid, something real, and his hand passes through it like smoke. And then he remembers. He is not flesh and blood anymore. He is not walking these halls with his own legs. He is dead, or as near to death as makes no difference, kept alive by machines and the determination of tech priests who refuse to let their most valuable weapons simply rest in peace. The worst dreams are those where the warrior forgets what he has become. He experiences himself as whole again, with a body that responds to his will without the intervention of mechanical systems. He feels the sun on his skin, tastes food and drink, engages in simple pleasures that he had taken for granted in his mortal life. And then something happens to remind him of the truth. A battle erupts and he reaches for weapons that should be in his hands, only to find that his hands themselves are weapons. Or he tries to speak and hears the mechanical rasp of vox speakers instead of his own voice. Or he simply catches his reflection in a polished surface and sees not the face he remembers but the cold, unyielding facade of a dreadnought's armor. The realization is always crushing, and in the dream he screams, but there is no sound because he has no lungs with which to scream. And then the dream collapses and he is falling again, tumbling through the dark, and the cycle begins anew. Time in these dreams has no meaning. A moment might stretch for what feels like years, or decades might pass in what seems like a heartbeat. There is no circadian rhythm to anchor perception, no external stimuli to mark the passage of days and nights. The consciousness drifts, untethered from any frame of reference. And if there are others sleeping nearby in their own sarcophagi, they might as well be universes away. Each dreadnought sleeps alone, locked in the private darkness of their own mind, and no communion between them is possible. They are islands of fading awareness, adrift in an endless sea, and the tide that carries them forward is beyond their control or comprehension. The first stirrings of return. Awakening does not come gently to a dreadnought. There is no gradual rise toward consciousness, no slow transition from sleep to wakefulness, like a mortal might experience upon waking in their bed. Instead, there is the absolute void of stasis, and then without warning, sensation floods back in a torrent. The first thing the warrior typically registers is pain. The neural connectors that link his organic brain to the machine's systems were never designed for comfort, and the reactivation sequence sends jolts of feedback through pathways that have been dormant for however long his sleep has lasted. It feels like being on fire and drowning and suffocating all at once, every nerve ending that still exists, screaming in protest at the sudden return of stimulus. The tech priests who designed these systems did their best to minimize this discomfort, of course. They are not deliberately cruel, and they understand that an anguished pilot is a less effective pilot. But there are limits to what can be achieved when you are wiring a human brain directly into a machine that was never meant to interface with organic tissue. The connection points were meant for servitors and mechanical systems, not for the preserved remains of a space marine. Adaptations have been made over the millennia, and each new pattern of Dreadnought incorporates slight improvements based on the experiences of previous generations. But the fundamental incompatibility remains. Human consciousness was never meant to exist in this way, and the reactivation process is a violent reminder of that fact. After the initial shock of pain comes the flood of information. The Dreadnought systems begin their startup sequences, each one reporting its status through the neural link. Weapon systems online, motive systems functional, power core operating within acceptable parameters, armor integrity confirmed, target acquisition systems calibrating, life support systems maintaining viability. The reports come faster than conscious thought can process them, a cascade of data that would overwhelm an unaugmented human mind in an instant. But a Space Marine's enhanced brain, even one long removed from its original body and hardwired into a machine, can handle the influx. It takes what it needs and discards the rest, building a picture of the Dreadnought's overall condition from thousands of minute status reports. The warrior's consciousness expands as the systems come online, his sense of self extending beyond the tiny organic core to encompass the entire massive frame of the war machine. He can feel the weapons mounted on his arms as clearly as he once felt his fingers. The sensors scattered across his hull become his eyes and ears, feeding him information about his surroundings from multiple angles simultaneously. The gyroscopic balancers and stabilization systems become his sense of equilibrium, letting him know that he is upright and stable, even though he has no inner ear to process such information. In a very real sense, the Dreadnought chassis becomes his body, and he inhabits it as naturally as he once inhabited flesh and bone. But there is always a moment, right at the beginning of each awakening, when the warrior remembers what he has lost. Before the machine integration feels natural, before his consciousness has fully expanded to fill the metal shell, there is a heartbeat of pure, existential horror. He tries to move his hand and feels the grinding of servo motors instead of the flex of muscle. He tries to take a breath and hears only the wheeze of life support systems pumping oxygenated fluid through what remains of his lungs. He tries to speak and hears his voice rendered mechanical and inhuman by vox speakers that translate his neural impulses into sound. For that single moment, he is trapped, a prisoner in a cage of his own making, and the weight of what he has sacrificed crashes down upon him with crushing force. Then training and discipline reassert themselves. The warrior pushes down the panic, buries the horror, focuses on the mission. This is what he was trained to do, after all. A Space Marine does not give in to fear or doubt. He serves, regardless of the cost. The fact that the cost, in this case, was his very humanity, becomes just another datum to be acknowledged and set aside. There will be time for grief and regret later, during the long dark between awakenings. Right now, there is only duty. The external world comes into focus gradually as the warrior's sensory systems complete their calibration. Usually, the first thing he sees is the face of a tech marine, helmet removed, leaning in close to peer at the status displays on the sarcophagus. The tech marine's lips are moving, speaking words of greeting or technical confirmation, but the audio systems take another moment to synchronize, and the words are initially lost. Then, sound returns in a rush, and the tech marine's voice becomes audible through the Vox link. "Welcome back, Ancient One. Your systems are coming online normally. Do you recognize me?" This question is not mere courtesy. One of the risks of extended stasis is degradation of memory, particularly short-term memory of the events immediately preceding the last shutdown. The tech priests need to confirm that the warrior's cognitive functions are intact before they can allow him to engage in combat operations. So the warrior focuses his optical sensors on the face before him, searching through the vast database of faces accumulated over centuries of service, trying to find a match. And this is when the first hint that something is wrong typically makes itself known. The face is unfamiliar, not just one he doesn't immediately recognize, but one that looks somehow different from what he expects. Younger, perhaps, or bearing unfamiliar chapter markings. Or the armor the tech marine wears is of a pattern the warrior doesn't immediately recognize, featuring design elements that seem subtly wrong or evolved from what he remembers. Or the tech marine's accent when he speaks carries inflections that sound strange to ears that last heard Gothic spoken in a different era. But the warrior has experienced this before, of course. He has awakened to find that decades or even centuries have passed, that faces he knew are gone and new generations have taken their place. It is part of what it means to be a dreadnought, so he reaches for the appropriate response, the one that has served him in the past. I recognize your chapter markings, brother, but your face is unknown to me. How long have I slept? The answer to this question will determine everything that follows. Usually, the response is measured in years or decades, long enough that the specific individuals the warrior knew before his last sleep have moved on to other duties or fallen in battle, but not so long that the fundamental nature of the chapter or the Imperium has changed. These awakenings are relatively straightforward. The warrior is briefed on recent events, given his mission parameters, and deployed to do what he does best. But sometimes, the answer is different. Sometimes, the tech marine hesitates, as if unsure how to deliver news that will shatter the ancient warrior's understanding of reality. Sometimes the hesitation stretches long enough that other figures step forward, chapter masters or chaplains, or venerable captains who have been summoned to bear witness to this awakening. And sometimes the answer, when it finally comes, is one that no amount of conditioning or training can prepare the warrior to hear. Ancient One, much has changed since your last awakening. You have slept for longer than you know. The galaxy you remember is gone. But the Imperium endures, and it has need of you now more than ever before. The words are carefully chosen, deliberately vague. They acknowledge that significant time has passed, without yet revealing the full extent of it. They prepare the warrior for revelation without overwhelming him immediately with information he cannot process. And they emphasize continuity and purpose, reminding him that regardless of what has changed, his fundamental role remains the same. He is a weapon in the Emperor's arsenal, and weapons do not need to understand the larger context to fulfill their function. But a space marine is more than just a weapon, and the mind within the Dreadnought chassis is still capable of curiosity and fear and hope despite the centuries of warfare and the long years of darkness between battles. So, the warrior does what he has always done when faced with incomplete information. He asks for clarification, demands to know what he needs to know to make sense of his situation. And in this awakening, the answer he receives will change everything. The impossible made real. The tech marine steps back, and another figure moves forward, one whose presence immediately commands attention, despite the warrior's sensory system still calibrating fully. This is no ordinary battle brother. The authority radiates from him in waves that even mechanical sensors can detect, a presence that speaks of supreme command and ancient right. The warrior's targeting systems automatically tag him as a high-priority asset, someone to be protected at all costs, even as his tactical database struggles to place exactly why this individual triggers such protocols. The figure is massive, even by the standards of space marines. Not quite the size of a dreadnought, but large enough that the warrior's optical sensors note the discrepancy, flagging it as anomalous data worth investigating. The armor this giant wears is of a pattern the ancient warrior recognizes from the deepest archives of his memory, from the time before the current age, from an era that should be nothing but history and legend. Artificer armor of the highest quality, decorated with honors that date back to when there were 18 legions rather than 1,000 chapters. And the face, when the helmet is removed. The face is wrong. No, not wrong. Impossible. The features are too perfect, too noble, too clearly not the product of any gene forging or enhancement that creates normal space marines. This is something else, something that the warrior's memories tell him cannot exist in the current age. This is the face of a being who should be dead, or lost, or worse, consigned to the histories as a figure of myth and legend, rather than standing here in the flesh. Recognition comes in a cascade of neural firing, connections sparking across preserved brain tissue that has not been called upon to process this particular information in thousands of years. The ancient warrior compares what his senses are telling him against memories so old they feel like they belong to someone else, to a different person who lived in a different age. The height matches, the bearing matches, the unmistakable aura of command and genetic superiority matches, and the face, allowing for the passage of millennia and the inherent impossibility of what the warrior is seeing, matches archival footage stored in the deepest banks of his recall. This cannot be. This must not be. The laws of reality as the warrior understands them do not permit this, and yet his senses are not malfunctioning. The chapter master and chaplain and tech priests gathered around are not engaging in some elaborate deception. The figure standing before him is exactly what every system and synapse is telling him it is. Against all logic, against all reason, against everything the warrior thought he knew about the state of the galaxy, a Primarch stands before him. Roboute Guilliman, the Avenging Sun, Lord of Ultramar and Master of the 13th Legion, has returned. The shock is profound enough that several of the Dreadnought's systems momentarily spike an alarm, threat assessment protocols activating as the chassis interprets the mental disturbance as a possible attack. Auto-stabilizers engage to keep the massive frame upright as the warrior's consciousness reels. For several seconds that feel like hours, the Ancient One simply cannot process what he is experiencing. The fundamental assumptions upon which he has based his understanding of reality for centuries are suddenly in question. The Primarchs were gone. This was known, accepted. A foundation of belief as solid as the fact that the Emperor sits upon the Golden Throne, or that there are exactly 20 original legions whose fate shaped the Imperium. Some were dead, slain during the heresy. Some were lost, disappeared into the warp or to Xenos threats, or simply vanishing without explanation. Some had fallen to chaos and become demon princes serving the dark gods. But none, not a single one of the loyal Primarchs, walked among the living warriors of the Imperium in the current age. This was a truth carved in stone, repeated in 10,000 sermons, mourned in countless battle hymns. The age of the Primarchs was over. Humanity fought on without them, mourning their loss but carrying forward their legacy. Except here stands proof that this fundamental truth is no truth at all. Here stands Roboute Guilliman, living and breathing and real, his presence undeniable despite the absolute impossibility of it. And if this truth can be overturned, what other assumptions might also be false? What other certainties might prove to be nothing more than comfortable lies, told to make the endless war seem bearable? The Primarch speaks, and his voice is exactly as the ancient warrior remembers it from briefings and proclamations heard thousands of years ago. Deep and resonant, carrying an authority that seems to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to some deeper part of the self that knows and accepts this is a being worthy of absolute loyalty and obedience. Be at peace, Ancient One. I know that my presence is difficult to comprehend. I know that you have many questions, and they will be answered. But first, you must understand this. The galaxy has changed more than you can imagine since your last awakening. The Imperium faces threats that would have seemed impossible in the age you remember, but I have returned, and I bring with me renewed hope for mankind's survival. Your service is needed now more than ever. Will you fight beside me once more, as you did in ages past? The question is almost rhetorical. What answer could an ancient warrior possibly give except absolute affirmation? To serve beside a Primarch, to fight under the direct command of one of the Emperor's own sons, is an honor that surpasses anything a Space Marine could hope to achieve. For a Dreadnought, who has sacrificed even death itself in service to the chapter, to be given the chance to fulfill that service in the presence of his genetic father is a gift beyond measure. But beneath the immediate surge of loyalty and duty, questions roil. How? How is this possible? The Primarch was dead, or as good as dead, held in stasis with wounds that should have killed even his transhuman physiology. For 10,000 years he has lain in state on Macragge, an object of pilgrimage and worship, but not truly alive in any meaningful sense. What power could restore him? What force could heal wounds inflicted by a demon Primarch wielding weapons blessed by the dark gods themselves? And why now? Why, after 10 millennia of absence, does he return at this particular moment? What has changed in the galaxy to necessitate or permit this resurrection? The ancient warrior's tactical mind, honed by thousands of years of warfare and strategic planning, cannot help but analyze the situation, even as he struggles to accept its reality. There must be a reason, some larger context that explains this development. Primarchs do not simply return from the dead without cause. Someone or something orchestrated this, and understanding who and why might be crucial to understanding what the warrior's role will be in whatever comes next. The Primarch seems to read these thoughts in the warrior's silence. A slight smile crosses those perfect features, understanding and perhaps a touch of sympathy evident in the expression. You wonder how this is possible. That is good. A warrior who cannot question is merely a weapon, and I need brothers who can think as well as fight. The full tale is long and complex, involving forces both Imperial and Xenos, technology both ancient and new, and circumstances that I still do not fully comprehend myself. What matters is this: I live. I have taken up once more the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium, and I have launched a crusade to reclaim what has been lost to darkness and chaos. This crusade needs warriors like you, Ancient One. Those who remember what the Imperium was meant to be, who carry within them memories of a time before the age of blind faith and superstition. Will you march beside me? The answer forms before conscious thought can intervene. I will, my lord. Whatever you command, wherever you would deploy me, I am yours to direct. This I swear by the Emperor, and by the honor of the chapter. Good, the Primarch says, and something in his bearing relaxes slightly, as if he had genuinely been uncertain of the response. Then let me show you what has become of my father's Imperium, and what we must do to save it from the darkness that threatens to consume it entirely. What follows is a briefing unlike any the ancient warrior has experienced in his long existence. As tech priests make final adjustments to his systems and prepare him for deployment, the Primarch himself takes the time to explain the current state of the galaxy. And with each revelation, the warrior's understanding of reality shifts further from anything he thought he knew. The galaxy has been split in two by a massive warp storm known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, or the Great Rift. This tear in reality stretches from the Eye of Terror all the way across to the eastern fringe, cutting off vast swathes of Imperial territory from Terra and the light of the Astronomicon. On the far side of this rift lies what is now called the Dark Imperium, or Imperium Nihilus, where worlds fight on in isolation against chaos and Xenos threats, without hope of reinforcement or even knowledge of whether the wider Imperium still exists. The Primarch had been resurrected through a combination of ancient technology and Xenos witchcraft, specifically the power of the Inari and their death god. This alone would have been shocking enough, but the Primarch speaks of it matter-of-factly, as a tactical necessity rather than heresy. He had made common cause with aliens to save the Imperium, and while some in the ecclesiarchy had protested, his authority as Lord Commander and the desperate state of the Imperium meant that pragmatism won out over dogma. Following his resurrection, the Primarch had launched the Indomitus Crusade, the largest military campaign since the Great Crusade itself. This crusade brought with it new weapons, new technology, and most shocking of all, a new generation of Space Marines. These Primaris Marines, as they are called, are larger and stronger than standard Astartes, created using genetic techniques developed by the Archmagos Belisarius Cawl over the course of 10,000 years. They represent an evolution of the Space Marine template, and they are being deployed across the galaxy to reinforce existing chapters or form entirely new ones. The numbers are staggering. 12 years since the start of the Crusade. Countless worlds liberated or reclaimed. Hundreds of thousands of new Primaris Marines awakened from stasis. New chapters founded, old chapters reinforced. The Imperium, which had been on the verge of collapse, given a chance to survive. And at the center of it all, directing the massive war effort with the strategic genius that made him legendary, stands Roboute Guilliman himself. The ancient warrior tries to process all of this, to fit these new facts into his understanding of the galaxy and the Imperium. But the sheer scope of the changes is overwhelming. He has slept through the most significant events in 10,000 years, missed the resurrection of a Primarch and the launch of a crusade that might determine the survival or extinction of humanity itself. While he lay in darkness, the galaxy transformed around him. And now he awakens to find himself in a reality he barely recognizes. And yet, beneath all the shock and confusion, there is something else stirring. Something that the ancient warrior has not felt in longer than he can remember. Hope. After centuries of fighting and endless holding action, of watching the Imperium slowly crumble no matter how many battles were won or how many enemies were slain, there is finally a reason to believe that victory might actually be possible. A Primarch has returned. The Emperor's own son leads them once more, and whatever challenges lie ahead, they will face them with the leadership and strategic brilliance that only a Primarch can provide. Encountering the Primaris. The first time the ancient warrior sees a Primaris Marine up close, his initial reaction is confusion. The figure standing before him is clearly one of the Emperor's Space Marines, bearing the heraldry and colors of the chapter with pride. But something is wrong with the proportions. The warrior's tactical systems have decades or centuries of experience analyzing the dimensions and capabilities of standard Astartes, and this individual does not match the expected parameters. He is too tall, too broad, the armor he wears featuring design elements that the warrior's database cannot immediately classify. For a moment, the Ancient One wonders if his optical sensors are malfunctioning, providing distorted data that makes this Marine appear larger than he actually is. But diagnostic checks return clean results. The sensors are functioning within normal parameters, which means the distortion is real. This Space Marine genuinely is larger than standard Astartes, approaching but not quite reaching the size of warriors in Terminator armor. And the armor itself, while clearly descended from the Mark 7 and 8 patterns that the warrior recognizes, incorporates improvements and innovations that suggest centuries of development. The Primaris Marine snaps to attention with crisp precision, his posture perfect despite the additional mass he carries. When he speaks, his voice carries the distinctive timbre of enhanced vocal cords. But there is something different about the resonance, a deeper quality that suggests even more extensive augmentation than standard Astartes receive. Ancient One, I am Brother Sergeant Lethis of the 3rd Company. It is an honor to fight alongside one of the chapter's venerable elders. I have been assigned as your tactical liaison for the coming engagement. The words are respectful, almost reverential, but the ancient warrior detects an undertone of curiosity in the Primaris Marine's bearing. This is someone who has been told about dreadnoughts, who understands their significance to the chapter's history, but who has never actually worked with one before. His generation has no personal memory of what it means to fight alongside these walking tombs, no first-hand experience of how to coordinate with a warrior whose tactical perspective spans centuries. At ease, Brother Sergeant, the ancient warrior replies, his mechanized voice conveying more warmth than the flat tone might suggest to someone unfamiliar with Dreadnought communication. I am called Honorus, though that name has not been spoken in longer than I care to contemplate. You say you are Primaris. I confess I do not fully understand what that designation entails beyond the obvious physical differences. Brother Sergeant Lethis relaxes slightly, though his posture remains parade ground perfect. We are the result of 10,000 years of genetic research, Ancient One. The Archmagos Belisarius Call, working from notes left by the Primarch himself before his wounding, developed techniques to create space marines with 3 additional gene seed organs beyond the standard 19. This makes us more resilient, stronger, and capable of enhanced performance across all combat parameters. 10,000 years of research. The number strikes the ancient warrior with fresh force. He knew intellectually that significant time had passed, but hearing it stated so casually as simple background information drives home just how much of history he has missed. While he slept, an entire age of development and improvement happened without his knowledge or participation. The Space Marines of the current era are literally built differently than the ones he fought alongside in his mortal life. 3 additional organs, Honoris repeats, processing this information. That would make 22 total, a significant modification to the Emperor's original design. There must have been substantial risk in implementing such changes. The gene seed is sacred, not to be tampered with lightly. Indeed, Ancient One, but the Primarch himself endorsed these modifications, having planned for them since before the heresy. And the crisis facing the Imperium was dire enough that risks had to be taken. Many chapters were hesitant to accept Primaris reinforcements at first, questioning whether we were truly their brothers or something alien wearing their colors. But battle has proven our loyalty and capability. We are Space Marines, as our firstborn brothers are, and we serve the Emperor and the Imperium without reservation. The term firstborn catches Honoris's attention, so that is what the standard Astartes are called now, in contrast to these new Primaris. Not a particularly flattering designation, implying as it does that the originals are somehow lesser or outdated. But then again, perhaps that implication is accurate. If these Primaris truly are superior in combat capability, if their additional organs and enhanced physiology make them more effective warriors, then the firstborn designation might simply be honest recognition of obsolescence. The ancient warrior considers his own situation in light of this revelation. If standard Astartes are now considered the lesser option, how does a Dreadnought fit into the hierarchy? Is he even more obsolete than firstborn Marines, a relic of an older age whose only value lies in historical knowledge? Or does his experience and the massive firepower of his chassis compensate for being built on outdated genetic templates? These are not comfortable thoughts, but Honoris has never shied away from uncomfortable truths. I see, he says carefully. And how do your fellow Primaris regard Dreadnoughts? Do they view us as honored ancestors, or as outdated weapon systems maintained out of tradition rather than practical necessity? The question is more pointed than Honoris intended, but Brother Sergeant Lethis takes no offense. If anything, he seems to appreciate the directness. With the deepest respect, Ancient One, we Primaris may be new to the chapter, but we were raised on the histories and traditions that make the chapter what it is. We know that every Dreadnought represents not just a powerful weapon, but a living link to the past, a repository of wisdom and experience that cannot be replicated. You have fought battles we have only read about in historical records. You have seen the Imperium at different stages of its existence, witnessed how it has changed and evolved. That perspective is invaluable, regardless of whether your chassis matches current technical specifications. The words sound sincere, and Honoris's analytical systems detect no markers of deception in Lethis's tone or bearing. The Primaris genuinely seems to believe what he is saying. But belief and reality do not always align, especially when discussing the value of ancient relics in a modern war. The true test will come in combat, when Honoris can observe firsthand how these new Space Marines fight, how they coordinate with older equipment and warriors, whether they truly respect the Dreadnought's tactical input or simply humor the Ancient One while making their own decisions. Then let us fight together, Brother Sergeant Lethis, and judge each other by our actions rather than our origins. Whatever genetic differences exist between us, we both serve the same cause, under the same Primarch. That is what matters in the end. Well said, Ancient One. I look forward to seeing you in battle. The briefings mentioned that your chassis is equipped with twin lascannons and a close combat fist with integrated heavy flamer, a versatile loadout for engaging both armored vehicles and infantry formations. The conversation shifts to tactical matters, discussing deployment zones and enemy force composition and coordination protocols. But even as Honoris engages with these practical concerns, part of his awareness remains focused on the larger implications of what he has learned. The Imperium has changed more than he initially realized, not just politically or territorially, but at a fundamental level. The very nature of what it means to be a space marine has evolved, with new types of warriors being introduced to supplement or replace the traditional firstborn. This raises questions that extend beyond simple tactical considerations. How will the chapters adapt to having two distinct types of Astartes in their ranks? Will tensions develop between firstborn and Primaris as they compete for glory and advancement? Or will they integrate seamlessly the superior capabilities of the Primaris, supplementing rather than replacing the experience of the firstborn? And what happens to chapter traditions and identity when warriors who were not originally part of the chapter start making up an increasing percentage of its forces? These are not questions Honoris can answer himself. They will unfold over time as the new normal establishes itself. But he makes a mental note to observe carefully, to pay attention to how firstborn and Primaris interact, to watch for signs of division or unity. Such observations might seem peripheral to his primary function as a weapon system, but the ancient warrior remembers the lessons of the Horus heresy. Division within the Imperium's military forces has led to catastrophe before, and any signs of such division emerging again need to be recognized and addressed before they can metastasize into something worse. But there is also room for optimism in these developments. If the Primaris truly are as capable as their specifications suggest, if they can be deployed in sufficient numbers across the Imperium, then perhaps there is genuine hope for turning the tide against the endless enemies pressing in from all sides. For the first time in longer than Honoris can remember, the Imperium is not just holding the line, but actually advancing, reclaiming lost worlds and pushing back against forces that had seemed unstoppable. That alone justifies whatever risks were taken in developing and deploying these new warriors. The briefing concludes, and Lethis moves off to attend to his other duties. Honoris is left alone for a moment, processing everything he has learned. The world has changed while he slept, but perhaps it has changed for the better. Perhaps this is what was needed all along: bold action rather than passive defense, innovation rather than stagnation, a willingness to adapt and evolve rather than clinging to the comfort of tradition. Or perhaps he is merely hoping for the best while ignoring warning signs of disaster to come. Time will tell. For now, there is a battle to fight and a Primarch to serve. Whatever else has changed, that core purpose remains constant, and Honoris will fulfill it as he has always done, with every ounce of capability his ancient chassis can muster. The weight of millennia. As preparations for deployment continue, Honoris finds himself with rare moments of inactivity. The tech priests have completed their maintenance rituals and pronounced his systems optimal. The tactical briefings have been delivered and absorbed. His weapons are loaded, his armor blessed, his chassis ready for war. All that remains is to board the transport and proceed to the combat zone. In these gaps between activity, awareness turns inward, and the ancient warrior confronts a truth he has been avoiding since his awakening. Everyone he knew is dead. It is not the first time Honoris has faced this reality. Every awakening brings fresh reminders that decades or centuries have passed, that faces once familiar are gone. But the sheer scope of the gap this time makes it different. He has not slept for years or even decades. Based on the briefings and the casual references to historical events, he has been dormant for more than a century, perhaps much more. The exact duration is unclear, lost in the chaos of the Great Rift and the time distortions it caused. But the specifics matter less than the fundamental truth. An entire generation of warriors has lived and died while Honorus slumbered. The chapter master who ordered his last activation is gone. The tech marine who performed his maintenance before that final sleep is gone. The squad mates who fought beside him in that last campaign, whose voices he can still hear echoing in his memory banks, are all gone. Every face he knew, every name he remembers, belongs now to the dust and the dead. He alone remains, kept artificially alive within his armored tomb, while the living move on without him. This is not tragedy in the conventional sense. Space Marines understand and accept death as part of their service. The chapter does not mourn individuals, but celebrates their contributions to the collective. Names are recorded in the rolls of honor, deeds memorialized in the chapter's histories, gene seed harvested and implanted in new warriors to carry on the legacy. Death is transition rather than ending, a warrior fulfilling his purpose so that others can take up the mantle he leaves behind. But for a Dreadnought, the experience is fundamentally different. Honorus did not transition to anything. He simply stopped existing for a while, and when he resumed, the world had moved on without him. There is a peculiar loneliness in this, a disconnection from the continuous flow of chapter life that his battle brothers experience. They live in a community of shared experiences, forming bonds that carry them through the challenges of their service. Honorus exists outside that community, appearing and disappearing like a ghost, never fully part of the current generation while being unable to return to his own. He wonders, not for the first time, whether this is truly the honor the chapter claims it to be. To be preserved beyond death, yes, that has a certain appeal. To continue serving the Emperor long after mortal form would have failed, absolutely that is admirable. But to exist in this liminal state, neither truly alive nor fully dead, watching the world change while remaining frozen in the moment of his internment. Sometimes Honorus questions whether this is gift or curse, whether the chapter preserves its dreadnoughts for their benefit or for its own. The thought is disloyal, and Honorus pushes it away almost as soon as it forms. Space Marines do not question, they serve. The fact that service sometimes comes at a cost that seems disproportionate to the benefit is irrelevant. What matters is that the job gets done, that the enemy is defeated, that the Imperium survives another day. Individual comfort, individual preference, individual happiness, all of these are luxuries that the galaxy cannot afford to indulge. But pushing away the thought does not make it disappear entirely. It lurks in the background of awareness, coloring everything else Honorus experiences. When he interacts with the Primaris Marines, he cannot help but notice how young they seem despite their enhanced physiology. Not young in years, perhaps, but young in experience, lacking the weight of centuries that makes every action feel like just another repetition of something done countless times before. They still have enthusiasm, still believe that this battle or that campaign might make a real difference in the grand struggle. Honorus knows better. He has fought too many battles that seemed decisive at the time, only to discover that new enemies simply emerge to replace the ones defeated. The war is endless, and individual victories are merely temporary pauses in the grinding attrition. This perspective, born of millennia rather than decades or centuries of service, is both gift and burden. On one hand, Honorus can provide tactical wisdom that comes only from extensive experience. He has fought countless battles across hundreds of worlds. He has seen strategies succeed and fail, has observed enemy tactics evolve over time, has learned lessons that cannot be taught but must be lived. This knowledge is invaluable, especially to younger commanders who might be tempted toward overconfidence or despair. On the other hand, that same perspective can make it difficult to maintain the emotional engagement that makes warriors fight with passion rather than mere competence. When every battle blurs into every other battle, when the faces of enemies become interchangeable with enemies fought centuries ago, when the whole endless war starts to feel like a cosmic joke played by indifferent gods, it becomes hard to muster the righteous fury that drives Space Marines to acts of extraordinary valor. Honorus fights with precision and skill, honed by millennia, but the fire that once burned in his breast has dimmed to barely glowing embers. Except now, there is the Primarch. This is the thought that Honorus keeps returning to, the detail that makes this awakening different from all the others. He is not simply being deployed to fight another battle in an endless war. He is fighting under the direct command of Reboot Guilliman himself, one of the Emperor's own sons. This is not just war. This is history, the kind of momentous event that chapters remember for generations. And Honorus, despite all the centuries weighing upon him, despite the weariness that sometimes threatens to overwhelm his will to continue, cannot help but feel stirrings of something that might be excitement or hope or even joy. He has lived to see a Primarch return. How many Space Marines, across 10,000 years of Imperial history, could make that claim? How many Dreadnoughts, preserved through the ages, have been awakened to find not just a changed galaxy, but a fundamentally transformed Imperium, one where the sons of the Emperor walk among mortals once more? This is unprecedented, unique, a gift that Honorus never imagined receiving. And with that gift comes renewed purpose. The question that haunted so many of his previous awakenings, the nagging doubt about whether continued existence in this state was truly worthwhile, suddenly has an answer. He exists for this. He was preserved through the ages so that when the Primarch returned and the Imperium needed its most experienced warriors, he would be available. All the centuries of darkness, all the battles fought and victories won, all the loss and loneliness and existential dread, all of it led to this moment. It is a comforting narrative, and Honorus allows himself to believe it, even while recognizing that it might simply be another story he tells to make sense of a fundamentally senseless situation. But whether the narrative is objectively true or merely a useful fiction, it serves its purpose. It gives him reason to engage fully with the coming battle, to fight not just with skill but with passion, to remember what it felt like in his earliest days as a Space Marine, when every action carried weight and meaning because it contributed to something larger than himself. Preparing for War Eternal. The boarding ramp of the Thunderhawk gunship clangs beneath Honorus's massive frame as he stomps aboard, each footfall resonating through the deck, plating with force that makes the nearby Primaris Marines glance over instinctively. The Dreadnought requires his own dedicated transport space, unable to share the standard troop compartments designed for warriors who still possess legs that can bend at the knee and torsos that can fit through regulation doorways. A section of the hold has been cleared and reinforced specifically for this deployment, with heavy-duty mounting clamps ready to secure the ancient chassis against the violence of atmospheric entry and combat maneuvering. Tech Marine Piriel oversees the securing process personally, his augmented eyes scanning the readouts that stream from contact points between Dreadnought and ship. Each clamp engages with a satisfying chunk of metal on metal, magnetic locks activating to hold tons of armor and weaponry in place against forces that would shear apart any lesser fastening. The Tech Marine speaks a brief prayer in binary, blessing the machine spirits of both vehicle and warrior, asking them to work in harmony for the glory of the Emperor and the Primarch. Systems read optimal, Ancient One, Piriel reports through the Vox link. Your chassis is secured for transit. Estimated time to combat zone is 42 minutes. The Primarch will be broadcasting tactical updates via encrypted channel Alpha Prime 7. Your systems have been configured to receive on that frequency. Understood, brother. I am ready. The Thunderhawk's engines roar to life, their thunder filling the hold, even through the sound dampening built into every surface. Honorus can feel the vibrations through his mounting points, a sensation that his brain interprets as similar to what he once experienced in his mortal body when standing near heavy machinery. The craft lifts from the hangar deck with the smooth efficiency of a vehicle maintained by tech priests who treat it as a sacred charge rather than simple equipment. Through the open boarding ramp, Honoris catches a glimpse of the strike cruiser's vast hangar bay, filled with dozens of other craft preparing for the same descent. A fleet of angels preparing to bring the Emperor's wrath to his enemies. Then the ramp closes, sealing the hold in the red-lit gloom of combat-ready status, and the Thunderhawk banks toward the planet's surface. The acceleration presses against Honoris's frame, testing the mounting clamps, but they hold firm as the gunship transitions from gentle maneuvering to aggressive attack vector. This is what Thunderhawks were built for, inserting Space Marines into the heart of enemy territory regardless of resistance, punching through hostile fire to deliver humanity's finest warriors exactly where they need to be. The squad of Primarch Marines sharing the hold occupy their designated positions with the calm readiness of warriors who have performed this ritual countless times. They are intercessors by their equipment, the Mark X Tacticus armor and auto-bolt rifles marking them as line infantry rather than specialists. Their faces behind helmet visors remain invisible, but their body language speaks of confidence tempered by awareness of danger. These are veterans, experienced enough to know how quickly battle can turn from routine to catastrophic, but not so scarred by loss that they have lost the edge of aggression that makes Space Marines effective. One of them, bearing sergeant markings, glances over at Honoris and speaks through the squad-wide Vox channel. "Ancient One, we have not fought alongside one of the chapter's venerable Dreadnoughts before. Our training covered basic coordination protocols, but if you have any specific tactical preferences for how we should support you, please advise." It is a reasonable question, professionally phrased. The sergeant understands that different Dreadnoughts prefer different fighting styles, and coordination works better when everyone knows what to expect from their allies. Some Dreadnoughts like to take point, using their massive armor to absorb fire that would obliterate standard Astartes, while their supporting squads flank around the distraction. Others prefer to hang back and provide covering fire while the infantry advances, using their heavy weapons to suppress enemy positions. Coordination between Dreadnought and infantry can mean the difference between victory and catastrophic failure. "I will assess the tactical situation upon landing," Honoris replies. "But in general, I prefer to engage the hardest targets directly, while you brothers handle area denial and elimination of secondary threats. I have twin-linked lascannons that can crack open any armor the enemy might field, and a power fist for close work when the situation demands it. Your bolt rifles will be more effective than my weapons against distributed infantry, so we should divide responsibilities accordingly. I draw fire. You eliminate threats that would otherwise flank or overwhelm me." "Understood, Ancient One. We will coordinate as the situation demands." The Thunderhawk bucks suddenly, the smooth flight disrupted by atmospheric turbulence or enemy fire, or both. Honoris's mounting clamps adjust automatically, compensating for the shift to keep his chassis stable despite the violent motion. Through the hull, he can hear the rapid thump of the gunship's defensive weapons engaging targets, clearing a path through whatever opposition the enemy has mustered. The craft's machine spirit remains confident, its status indicators showing no significant damage despite the resistance. Then comes the voice that cuts through everything else, broadcast on the Primarch's command channel, deep and resonant even through Vox distortion. "All forces, this is Guilliman. We are beginning orbital descent. The enemy knows we are coming and has prepared defensive positions at all primary landing zones. This is expected and acceptable. We will strike hard, establish beachheads, and begin the liberation of this world from the traitors who have claimed it. Emperor, be with you all." The words are simple, almost perfunctory. Compared to the soaring rhetoric of other commanders Honoris has served under, the Primarch's battlefield communication style is almost businesslike. But there is something in the tone, an absolute confidence that carries its own power. This is not a commander hoping for victory or promising to do his best. This is a Primarch stating facts about how the next few hours will unfold, speaking from a position of such tactical and strategic superiority that doubt simply does not enter the equation. Honoris has heard battlefield speeches from chapter masters and company captains, rousing words meant to inspire warriors to feats of extraordinary valor. He has heard desperate calls for last stands when defeat seemed inevitable. He has heard calm, tactical assessments from commanders who treated war as a mathematical problem to be solved. But he has never before heard this particular combination of authority and certainty, the voice of someone who was literally designed by the emperor himself to command armies and win wars. It is, the ancient warrior realizes, profoundly motivating in a way that transcends simple inspiration. Honorus has been fighting for so long that the reasons why have sometimes grown dim, the original purpose subsumed under the mechanical repetition of endless combat. But hearing the Primarch speak reminds him of what he is fighting for, who he serves, why it matters. This is not just another battle. This is part of a campaign led by one of the Emperor's own sons, a campaign to save the Imperium from dissolution and restore something of what it was meant to be. And Honorus, ancient beyond reckoning, preserved through the ages in his armored tomb, has been given the privilege of participating in that great work. The Thunderhawk pitches forward sharply, beginning its final descent toward the combat zone. Through the hull, Honorus can hear the scream of atmosphere across the craft's armored skin, the roar of engines fighting gravity and air resistance to maintain controlled flight. This is the moment of greatest vulnerability during any insertion, the window where a well-placed anti-aircraft round can turn a gunship into a falling coffin filled with space marines who will never reach the battlefield. But the Thunderhawk's pilot is skilled and the Emperor is watching, and the craft punches through the defensive envelope without taking critical damage. 30 seconds to ground contact, the pilot announces. Recommend all passengers brace for hard landing. We're taking fire from the northeast. Might need to deploy under less than optimal conditions. Acknowledged, the Intercessor Sergeant replies. All units prepare for immediate combat action upon disembarkation. The last 30 seconds stretch like hours as the Thunderhawk makes its final approach. Honorus runs diagnostic checks on his weapon systems, confirming ammunition loads and power reserves, ensuring that everything will function when required. His optical sensors flick through different viewing modes, thermal and electromagnetic and standard light spectrum, testing that all options remain available. His targeting matrix runs through a final calibration, cross-referencing the tactical data downloaded during briefing with real-time environmental scans. Everything reads optimal. He is as ready as 10,000 years of warfare and technical refinement can make him. Then impact. Not quite a crash, but hard enough that Honorus's mounting clamps strain against the force. The boarding ramp drops with a hydraulic hiss, bringing blessed fresh air and natural light after the cramped confines of the hold. The mounting clamps release, magnetic locks disengaging with sharp clangs, and Honorus strides forward into the light and war and glory that await. The world outside the Thunderhawk is chaos. They have landed in what was once a plaza or parade ground, surrounded by shattered buildings and streets torn by bombardment and battle. Smoke drifts across the landscape, obscuring sightlines and making thermal imaging more valuable than normal optics. The crack of bolt weapons echoes from multiple directions as other squads engage with enemy forces that must have been waiting for exactly this insertion. And in the distance, visible as an enormous figure moving with impossible speed and grace through the combat zone. Honorus can see the Primarch himself, the Emperor's sword blazing with golden fire as he carves through enemy ranks like a farmer reaping wheat. This is it. This is what Honorus was preserved for. All the centuries of service, all the battles fought and brothers lost, all the long sleep and difficult awakening, all of it has led to this single perfect moment. He is going to war beside a Primarch, fighting to reclaim worlds lost to darkness, serving the Emperor in the most direct and meaningful way a Space Marine can possibly serve. The ancient warrior's weapons come online with the singing of capacitors charging and ammunition feeds cycling. His optical sensors acquire targets, hostile signatures painting themselves red in his vision as his targeting matrix calculates firing solutions. Around him, the Primaris Marines deploy in perfect order, establishing a perimeter and preparing to advance on the enemy positions. Above, more Thunderhawks are landing, disgorging their cargoes of ceramite armored warriors into the growing battle. And somewhere in the larger strategic picture, invisible from ground level but absolutely present in the tactical network, Reboot Guilliman coordinates the entire massive operation with the casual expertise of someone who has won more victories than any living human could count. Honorus charges forward, his massive frame eating up distance with surprising speed for something so large. The enemy ahead, traitor guardsmen wearing the marks of chaos, turn their weapons toward the approaching Dreadnought with looks of terror visible even through their crude helmets. They fire, small arms and even heavier weapons, their shots sparking against armor that has turned aside tank shells and power weapons wielded by creatures of nightmare. Their efforts are futile, heroic perhaps in their desperation, but ultimately meaningless against a walking fortress designed specifically to shrug off everything they can bring to bear. Then, Honorus returns fire, and the plaza erupts with the thunder of las cannons discharging at full power. The beams of coherent light slice through enemy fortifications like cutting tools through paper, melting steel and stone and flesh with equal ease. A traitor, Lehman Russ tank, dug into a defensive position and covered with blasphemous sigils, simply ceases to exist in the practical sense, as twin Lascannon beams converge on its ammunition storage and turn it into a miniature sun. The explosion sends debris flying in all directions, shrapnel pinging off Honorus's armor like metallic rain, and the ancient warrior laughs, his mechanized voice booming across the battlefield in a sound that is equal parts joyful and terrible. After so long asleep, after so long wondering if his service still mattered, after so long questioning whether continued existence was blessing or curse, he has his answer. This is what he exists for. This is what makes the endless dark bearable. This is purpose and meaning and glory, all rolled into one perfect moment of righteous destruction. He is a Dreadnought of the Adeptus Astartes, fighting beside a Primarch in service to the Emperor of mankind. And for this one perfect moment, all is right with the universe. A new age of crusade. The battle for the city rages for 3 days and 3 nights, a grinding campaign of urban warfare that sees entire districts reduced to rubble before the traitor forces are finally routed. Honorus fights throughout it all, his chassis taking hits that would have crippled lesser vehicles, but holding together through a combination of ancient engineering and constant field repairs by tech priests who work under fire to keep their most valuable asset operational. He loses count of how many enemies fall before his weapons, how many fortifications he reduces to ruin, how many times he places himself between the enemy and his battle brothers to absorb fire that would have killed them. But what he does remember, what his enhanced memory banks preserve with perfect clarity, are the moments when he fights in proximity to the Primarch himself. 3 separate occasions during the campaign find Honorus and Guilliman operating in the same tactical zone, close enough that the ancient warrior can observe firsthand what it means when a Primarch goes to war. The first time is on the 2nd day, when traitor forces make a desperate counterattack aimed at retaking the primary landing zone. They come in waves, cultist mobs backed by corrupted tanks and twisted things that were once human, but have surrendered to the warp's mutations. It is a powerful assault, well coordinated despite the chaos markings adorning every surface, and for a moment, it seems like it might actually succeed in overwhelming the Imperial perimeter. Then, Robuta Guilliman appears at the breach point, and the entire character of the battle changes instantly. He moves with speed that seems impossible for something so large. The Emperor's sword in his hands, blazing with golden fire that burns with a light entirely unlike any physical flame. Each swing of that blade cuts down multiple enemies. The psychic energies infused into the weapon by the Emperor himself, incinerating traitors before the physical edge even makes contact. The The Primarch's other hand holds the Hand of Dominion, a massive power gauntlet that tears through armor and flesh with contemptuous ease. Where he walks, death follows, and the traitor assault dissolves into panicked rout as those facing him realize they are not fighting a mere warrior, but something that transcends human limitation entirely. Honoris finds himself advancing alongside the Primarch, providing supporting fire while Guilliman carves a path through the enemy ranks. The ancient warriors Lascannons pick off targets that try to flank the Primarch, eliminating threats before they can bring their weapons to bear. Together, they push the enemy back, step by grinding step, until the counterattack completely collapses and the surviving traitors flee back into the ruins they came from. The Primarch turns to Honoris as the immediate threat fades, his perfect features showing no sign of exertion despite the intensity of the combat. Well fought, Ancient One. Your targeting was precise and your positioning optimal. The Emperor chose well when your chapter decided to preserve you in that chassis. The words are simple, a brief acknowledgement of successful coordination, but coming from a Primarch, they carry weight that makes Honoris's consciousness soar. This is not some mortal commander offering praise, but one of the Emperor's own sons, a being whose judgment can be trusted absolutely. If Guilliman says Honoris fought well, then it is objective fact rather than mere encouragement. Thank you, my lord. It is an honor beyond measure to fight at your side. I remember the Great Crusade, before the heresy. I remember what it was like when the Primarchs led us. I never thought to experience that again. Guilliman's expression becomes more complex, something that might be sadness or regret flickering across those perfect features. The Great Crusade is long past, Ancient One. What we build now will be different, tempered by 10,000 years of hard lessons. But perhaps we can reclaim some of what was lost, some of the hope and purpose that drove us in those early days. If warriors like you stand with me, willing to fight for a better Imperium, rather than simply accepting the decay that has consumed my father's dream, then perhaps there is hope yet. Then the Primarch is moving again, advancing toward the next objective, and Honoris can only follow and wonder at what he has been told. The Primarch speaks of building something different, of not simply restoring what was, but creating something new and hopefully better. This is not the rhetoric Honoris has heard from other imperial leaders, who typically speak of preservation and restoration rather than transformation. Guilliman, it seems, understands that the Imperium has changed beyond recognition, and that simple restoration is impossible. Instead, he aims to steer that change, to guide the evolution towards something that serves humanity rather than consuming it. It is a bold vision, perhaps impossibly bold. The Imperium is vast beyond human comprehension, grinding slowly forward under the weight of tradition and dogma and bureaucracy that has calcified over millennia. Changing it, steering it toward a new course, seems like trying to alter the orbit of a planet through force of will alone. But if anyone can accomplish such a task, it would be a Primarch, one of the beings specifically designed by the Emperor to lead humanity to its destiny. The second time Honoris fights near Guilliman is during the assault on the governor's palace, where the traitor leadership has fortified themselves behind meters of armorplus and void shields. The palace is a fortress within a fortress, designed to withstand orbital bombardment and stocked with enough supplies to endure a siege lasting years. Under normal circumstances, taking such a position would require months of patient siege work, slowly degrading the defenses until they could be breached. But Guilliman does not have months to spend on a single world, not when the entire galaxy burns. So instead, the Primarch decides on a direct assault, leading from the front as he always does, trusting in his tactical genius and the superior capability of his forces to overcome defenses that would stop any conventional attack. Honoris is part of the breaching force, his Dreadnought chassis, equipped with a siege drill specifically to punch through the reinforced walls. The assault is brutal, every meter contested by defenders who know they have nowhere to retreat. But step by step, the Loyalists advance, pushing deeper into the palace complex, clearing rooms and corridors with the methodical violence that Space Marines bring to close-quarters combat. And at the center of it all is the Primarch, wielding the Emperor's sword like an extension of his own will, his presence radiating such profound authority that even hardened traitors hesitate when facing him directly. Honorus watches in awe as Guilliman personally duels the Chaos Lord, leading the defense, a towering brute in corrupted Terminator armor who must have been a formidable warrior before his fall. The duel lasts perhaps 10 seconds. Then the Chaos Lord's head tumbles from his shoulders, cut clean through by a blade that burns with the Emperor's own power, and the traitor defense collapses as its leadership literally loses its head. The third encounter comes on the final day of fighting, when the last traitor holdouts are being cleared from the underhive levels beneath the city proper. These are the fanatics and the desperate, those who know that capture means execution, and have decided to sell their lives as dearly as possible. They have rigged the underhive with explosives and traps, turned the entire subterranean warren into a deadly maze where every corner might conceal an ambush or improvised bomb. Clearing such spaces is slow, dangerous work, even for Space Marines. Honorus is part of a kill team working systematically through one of the deeper sections when the Vox network suddenly lights up with emergency signals. A squad of Primaris Marines has been ambushed and pinned down by heavy fire from multiple directions, their position untenable without immediate reinforcement. The coordinates put them 3 levels down and nearly half a kilometer distant, too far for Honorus to reach in time, even at his chassis' maximum speed. But it is not too far for a Primarch who knows exactly where he needs to be and has no patience for obstacles that slow lesser warriors. Guilliman reaches the ambushed squad in less than 2 minutes, moving through the underhive with such speed that the enemy barely has time to react before he is among them. By the time Honorus and his accompanying forces reach the location, the fighting is already over. The Primarch stands amid a circle of enemy corpses, calmly reloading the bolt weapon he carries, while the rescued Primaris Marines look on with something approaching religious awe. "Ancient One," Guilliman acknowledges as Honorus arrives. "Your kill team should proceed to grid reference 7 Alpha 3. Intelligence reports a munitions cache there that needs to be secured before the enemy can detonate it and collapse this entire section. I will continue clearing this level with these brothers." "At once, my lord." As Honorus moves to comply, he reflects on what he has witnessed over these 3 days of fighting. The Primarch is everything the legends said, and more. A warrior whose capabilities exceed even enhanced human limits. A tactical genius who can process information and make decisions with superhuman speed. A leader who inspires absolute loyalty simply through the force of his presence. Fighting under his command is like being part of a perfectly orchestrated symphony, every warrior playing their part in harmony with the whole, directed by a conductor who understands the music better than any individual musician ever could. But there is something else too, something that takes Honorus longer to articulate even to himself. The Primarch cares. Not in the abstract sense that all commanders must care about their forces if they hope to maintain morale and combat effectiveness, but in a genuine, personal way that seems strange for a being who rules over hundreds of worlds and commands millions of warriors. Guilliman knows the names of individual Space Marines, remembers details about their service records, takes time to acknowledge their contributions and sacrifices. He treats them not as expendable resources, but as brothers, fellow warriors engaged in a common struggle. This stands in stark contrast to the Imperial commanders Honorus has served under for most of his existence, officials who view Space Marines as weapons to be deployed against problems, rather than as individuals worthy of consideration. The Primarch remembers what the Imperium was meant to be, when the Emperor's dream was still fresh and uncorrupted by 10,000 years of dogma and decay, and he is trying, against all odds and obstacles, to bring some of that original vision back to life. It is a noble goal, perhaps a foolish one, but it gives Honoris something he has not felt in longer than he can remember. A sense that the endless war might actually be building towards something, rather than simply grinding on forever. The Primarch's crusade is not just about reconquest, but about transformation. Not just about holding the line, but about pushing forward to create something better. And if a centuries-old Dreadnought can contribute to that vision in some small way, then his preservation and all the sacrifices it entailed suddenly seem worthwhile. The Dark Imperium revealed. After the victory on the planet, designated Tertius 7, there is a brief respite as the Crusade fleet regroups and prepares for the next objective. The world they have liberated burns with purifying fires as the ecclesiarchy begins the process of reconsecrating every structure that bore the taint of chaos. The work will take years, perhaps decades, but it is necessary if this world is to rejoin the Imperium as a faithful member, rather than a potential source of future corruption. Honoris watches from the strike cruiser's observation deck as Prometheum flames consume the buildings where traitors made their last stands, thinking about all the other worlds across the galaxy that need similar cleansing. During this lull in operations, Honoris is summoned to the strike cruiser's strategium for a comprehensive briefing on the current state of the galaxy. The summons comes through official channels, delivered by a chapter serf who seems nervous about approaching the massive Dreadnought chassis. Honoris follows the serf through corridors built for regular space marines, his frame forcing him to duck through doorways and carefully navigate tight turns. Other crew members press themselves against the walls as he passes, giving the ancient warrior the space his bulk requires. The strategium is one of the few spaces on the vessel large enough to accommodate a Dreadnought comfortably. It is a vast chamber, its walls covered with display screens and hololithic projectors capable of rendering the entire galaxy in perfect detail. Tech priests man consoles around the perimeter, monitoring data feeds and coordinating communications with other vessels in the Crusade fleet. At the center stands a massive table capable of projecting three-dimensional maps and tactical displays, and around this table gather the strike cruiser's command staff. Honoris recognizes most of the faces present. Chapter Master Orestes stands at the head of the table, his expression grave. To his right is Chaplain Mordrin, whose skull-faced helmet rests on the table before him, revealing a scarred face that has seen more battles than most mortals could imagine. Several company captains are present as well, along with a handful of Primaris Marines, whose presence still feels slightly incongruous to Honoris, despite having fought alongside them for months. He has already received tactical data specific to individual engagements, of course. Before every deployment, there are briefings covering enemy dispositions and objectives and coordination protocols. But this is something different. This is a strategic overview, showing not just where the enemy is, but the larger context of why the war is being fought as it is. This is the kind of briefing that Honoris remembers from his mortal days, when chapter leadership would gather to discuss campaigns lasting years or decades, rather than mere battles lasting hours or days. Chapter Master Orestes presides over the briefing, his voice carrying the grave weight of someone delivering news that he still has trouble fully accepting himself. Ancient One, you have fought well since your awakening, but I believe you do not yet grasp the full scope of how radically the galaxy has changed. What I am about to show you may seem impossible, but I assure you every detail has been verified through multiple sources. The hololithic display activates, projecting a three-dimensional representation of the Milky Way galaxy in the center of the strategium. At first glance, it looks like any standard tactical map Honoris has seen before. The densely packed stars of the galactic core, the spiral arms extending outward, key systems marked with identifying icons that denote Imperial presence or Xenos threats. But then the chapter master gestures, and the map updates to show the current situation. And Honoris's consciousness reels at what he sees. A massive scar runs across the entire galaxy, a twisting wound in reality that stretches from the Eye of Terror in the galactic west all the way to the eastern fringe. This is no ordinary warp storm, no localized phenomenon that might dissipate given time and prayer. This is a fundamental tear in the fabric of space and time itself, a permanent breach between the material realm and the immaterium, and it has split the Imperium cleanly in two. The cicatrix maledictum, Orestes explains, his voice heavy with import, also known as the Great Rift. It appeared in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade and the fall of Cadia, when the pylons that had held back the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years were finally destroyed. The energies released by that catastrophe cascaded across the galaxy, tearing open warp rifts and warp storms that merged into this single massive breach. We estimate that approximately 43% of Imperial territory lies on the far side of the rift, cut off from Terra and the light of the Astronomicon. 43%, nearly half the Imperium, separated from the rest by a barrier more impassable than any physical distance. Honoris tries to process the implications and finds them almost too vast to comprehend. Thousands of worlds, hundreds of Space Marine chapters, countless billions of Imperial citizens, all isolated in what the briefing calls the Dark Imperium or Imperium Nihilus. Some have continued fighting despite the isolation, holding out against enemies that see the rift as opportunity rather than disaster. Others have succumbed to conquest or corruption, lost to Xenos expansion or chaos infestation, or simple collapse of civil order. The creation of the rift caused what we call the Noctis Aeterna, the chapter master continues, a period of darkness when the Astronomicon's light was obscured across the entire galaxy. Warp travel became impossible or fatally dangerous. Worlds were isolated from one another, unable to call for help or receive reinforcement. The exact duration of the Noctis Aeterna is difficult to determine due to temporal distortions the rift causes, but estimates range from weeks to years depending on local conditions. During that time, the Imperium came closer to total collapse than at any point since the Horus Heresy. The briefing continues, laying out detail after terrible detail. Worlds that descended into civil war when cut off from higher authority. Space Marine chapters wiped out defending planets that received no reinforcement. Forge worlds overrun by chaos invasions. Hive cities consumed by demonic incursions. The list goes on, a litany of loss that would be crushing if Honoris allowed himself to dwell on it. But the chapter master is not dwelling on past failures. He is building toward the crucial point that makes sense of everything that has happened since. This is why the Primarch's return was so critical, Orestes says. This is why his resurrection, achieved through methods some might consider heretical, was absolutely necessary despite the theological controversies it raised. The Imperium could not survive the opening of the Great Rift without exceptional leadership at the highest level. Lord Guilliman has provided that leadership, organizing and launching the Indomitus Crusade to stabilize the Imperium Sanctus, while simultaneously preparing operations to eventually cross the rift and bring aid to those worlds still fighting on the far side. The hololithic display shifts, showing fleet movements and campaign objectives, worlds liberated and sectors secured. The scope of the Indomitus Crusade becomes clear. A massive military operation involving millions of warriors and thousands of ships, all coordinated by the Primarch's strategic genius. This is not just war. This is the largest mobilization of Imperial forces since the Great Crusade itself, an attempt to not merely survive, but to actively push back against the darkness threatening to consume humanity entirely. What of the worlds beyond the rift? Honoris asks. The Dark Imperium, are they simply lost, abandoned to their fate? Not abandoned, Orestes replies, but cut off. Lord Guilliman has made it clear that once the Imperium Sanctus is stabilized, crossing the rift and bringing reinforcement to those worlds is a top priority. He has already made one crossing himself, to Baal, where the Blood Angels and their successors were under siege by Hive Fleet Leviathan. That intervention saved the sons of Sanguinius from annihilation and appointed Commander Dante as regent of the entire Dark Imperium. But the crossing was costly and dangerous, and we cannot mount such operations regularly until we better understand how to navigate the rift without losing entire fleets to the warp's fury. So there are worlds still fighting, still loyal, still holding the line, despite isolation that would break lesser cultures. This knowledge gives Honoris a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride that humans can endure such circumstances and continue to resist. Sorrow that they must do so alone, without the support that a unified Imperium could provide. The ancient warrior wonders how many heroes are being born in the Dark Imperium, space marines and guard regiments, and navy crews, fighting desperate battles that no one on the Terra side of the rift will ever know about. The briefing covers other developments as well. The Primaris Marines and how they are being deployed across the Imperium. The return of other threats like the Tyranids and the Necrons. The stirring of ancient enemies like the Aeldari, who seem to be pursuing their own agendas with increased desperation. The revelation that Chaos Primarchs like Magnus and Mortarion are actively leading forces in the material realm again, pursuing their own campaigns of destruction and corruption. Every piece of information adds to a picture of a galaxy in crisis, where the old certainties have shattered and new threats emerge constantly. But through all of it, one fact remains clear. The Imperium endures. Despite everything, despite the rift and the Noctis Eterna and the innumerable enemies pressing in from all sides, humanity survives. The Space Marine chapters continue their eternal vigil. The Imperial Guard musters countless regiments to fight on endless battlefields. The Imperial Navy patrols the void between stars. And now, for the first time in 10,000 years, a Primarch leads them, providing the strategic vision and tactical excellence that only one of the Emperor's own sons can offer. Honoris absorbs all of this, integrating the new information into his understanding of the galaxy and his place in it. He has awakened to find himself in an age of catastrophe, yes, but also an age of opportunity. The Great Rift has shattered the old order, forced the Imperium to adapt or die. And in that forced adaptation, perhaps there is space for something better to emerge. The Primarch certainly seems to believe so, speaking as he does of reform and rebuilding rather than mere restoration. The briefing concludes with tactical assignments for the next phase of the crusade, specific worlds and systems that need to be liberated or secured. Honoris's chassis will be deployed to Theta Secundus, an agri-world threatened by Orc raiders taking advantage of the chaos following the rift's opening. It is not glamorous work, not the kind of battle that will be remembered in chapter histories, but it is necessary. Every world saved is a victory. Every population preserved is a contribution to humanity's survival. And Honoris has learned over his centuries of service that glory is less important than effectiveness, that quiet competence serves the Emperor better than dramatic heroism. As he leaves the strategium, the ancient warrior reflects on what he has learned. The galaxy is broken, perhaps irreparably. The Imperium faces challenges that would have seemed overwhelming even in the days of the Great Crusade when all the Primarchs fought together. But there is hope too, embodied in the return of Reboot Guilliman and the launching of the Indomitus Crusade. The war is far from won, but for the first time in longer than Honoris can remember, it seems like it might actually be winnable, and that makes all the difference. The honor of ancient days. Sleep comes for Honoris again eventually, as it must for all dreadnoughts. After months of continuous deployment, after dozens of battles fought across multiple worlds, the tech priests finally declare that his chassis requires maintenance too extensive to perform in the field. The wear and tear of sustained combat has stressed systems that were already ancient before the current generation of Space Marines was born. Seals need replacing, ammunition feeds need recalibration, armor plates require rewelding where enemy fire has scored deep gouges through blessed ceramite. The work will take weeks, possibly months, and cannot be done while Honoris remains active. So the ancient warrior is returned to the strike cruiser, to the sacred halls where dreadnoughts sleep between deployments. Tech priests swarm over his frame, beginning the laborious process of diagnostics and repair, while chanting prayers to machine spirits that may or may not actually exist. Honoris remains conscious through the initial stages of this process, watching through his optical sensors as the techs work, ensuring that they treat his chassis with the respect it deserves. Eventually, though, they will begin work on systems that interface directly with his organic brain, and he will need to be placed in stasis to prevent damage to the precious tissues that hold his consciousness. Chapter Master Orestes comes to the Dreadnought Bay the night before the stasis protocols will be initiated. It is unusual for one of his rank to personally attend such occasions, but perhaps the Chapter Master feels that acknowledgement is owed after the service Honoris has provided during this campaign. Or perhaps he simply recognizes that the ancient warrior might have concerns or questions that deserve to be addressed before the long dark claims him once more. Ancient One, Orestes begins, his voice carrying formal respect. Your service during the Indomitus Crusade has been exemplary. 14 major engagements, 57 confirmed kills of enemy armor, tactical consultations provided to 3 different company captains, and 0 instances of mechanical failure requiring field evacuation. The chapter honors you for your dedication and skill. I have done only what any warrior of the chapter would do, Honoris replies, his mechanized voice modulating to convey humility. The honor is mine, to have served beside a Primarch and contributed however slightly to his great work. You contributed more than you know. The Primarch himself noted your performance during the assault on Tertia 7. He said that warriors like you represent the best of what the Imperium can be, carrying forward the traditions and values of the Great Crusade while adapting to serve in the current age. High praise from one who does not offer empty compliments. The ancient warrior processes this information, trying to understand what it means that a Primarch has noticed and commented on his actions. It is one thing to fight beside Guilliman, to receive brief acknowledgements during active operations. It is quite another to learn that the Lord Commander of the Imperium has specifically noted a single dreadnought's performance and deemed it worthy of comment. I am humbled, Honoris says, and means it. I never imagined when I was interred in this chassis that I would live to serve directly under a Primarch. That alone would have made the sacrifice worthwhile. To learn that my service was adequate to his standards is gratification beyond measure. Orestes nods, understanding what is being said beneath the formal words. You will sleep now, for a time, but I want you to know that you will be awakened again. The crusade continues, and we will have need of your wisdom and your weapons. The Primarch has authorized expansion of the chapter, incorporation of new Primaris brothers, to replace our losses and increase our strength. You will awaken to find many unfamiliar faces, but they will know your name and your deeds. You are becoming legendary, Ancient One, a living connection between the chapter's past and its future. Legendary. The word strikes Honoris with strange force. He has been a dreadnought for so long that he sometimes forgets others see him differently than he sees himself. To the ancient warrior, he is simply trying to do his duty, to serve as best he can, despite the limitations of his altered existence. But to younger space marines, those who have heard the tales and read the histories, but never actually met one of the chapter's venerable ancients, he must seem like something out of myth. A warrior from an earlier age, preserved through the centuries to fight on long after his mortal body should have failed. I will serve as long as I am able, Honoris says. As long as the chapter has need of me, as long as the Emperor's enemies threaten the Imperium, I will continue this vigil. There is no higher calling, no greater honor, than to spend one's existence in service to humanity's survival. That is the spirit that makes you worthy of preservation, the chapter master responds. Sleep well, Ancient One. When you wake, you will find the galaxy changed yet again. But you will also find that the chapter endures, that the Emperor's work continues, and that there is still purpose in the fight. These certainties remain constant, even as everything else shifts and transforms. With that, Orestes departs, leaving Honoris alone with the tech priests who continue their maintenance rituals. The ancient warrior watches them work for a time, observing the careful reverence with which they handle each component, the prayers they speak over every system. They serve the machine god. These tech priests believe that consciousness can reside in circuits and code as surely as in flesh and blood. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps Honoris's essence now extends beyond the organic brain preserved at his core, distributed throughout the mechanical systems that give him form and function. Perhaps he is more machine than man now, after so long living in this state. The thought does not trouble him as much as it once did. He has made peace with what he has become, accepted that this is his fate and his purpose. The sacrifices required to serve as a dreadnought are real and profound, but they are worth making for the sake of the greater good. Individual comfort, individual preference, individual humanity, all of these matter less than the continuation of the species and the preservation of the Emperor's dream. As the tech priests finish their preliminary work and begin preparing the stasis protocols, Honoris allows his consciousness to drift, reviewing the memories he has accumulated during this awakening. The battles fought, the brothers met, the glimpses of the Primarch that have been burned into his recall with perfect clarity. These experiences will sustain him during the darkness, giving him anchors to hold on to when the void threatens to consume all sense of self. And there is one memory above all that Honoris will treasure, one moment that made the entire awakening worthwhile. It happened during the final stages of the campaign on Tertius 7, when the traitor forces were breaking and fleeing and the Imperial victory was assured. Honoris had been holding a defensive position, providing overwatch for Primaris Marines who were securing critical infrastructure. The fighting in his immediate area had died down, giving him a rare moment to simply observe the larger battlefield. And there, visible through smoke and distance, stood Roboute Guilliman, surrounded by officers and officials who were already beginning the work of transitioning the world from combat zone to liberated territory. The Primarch's armor was scored by battle damage, and his perfect features showed signs of strain despite his superhuman endurance. But his posture remained unbowed, his bearing still conveying absolute authority and determination. He was discussing something with an Imperial governor, gesturing at maps and hololithic displays, already planning how to rebuild what war had destroyed. In that moment, Honoris understood something profound. The Primarch was not just a war leader, not simply a tactical genius deployed to win battles. He was a builder, an administrator, someone who thought in terms of centuries and millennia rather than campaigns and engagements. Guilliman was trying to do what the Emperor himself could not complete, create a functioning galactic civilization that could survive and thrive despite the infinite threats pressing against it from all sides. The military campaigns were necessary, yes, but they were means rather than ends. The true goal was to give humanity a future worth fighting for. This understanding gave Honoris's service new context. He was not just fighting to kill enemies or reconquer worlds. He was contributing, however minutely, to the greatest work of civilization building in human history. Every battle won, every world secured, every year that humanity survived another turn of the galactic cycle, all of it mattered, because all of it gave the Primarch more time and space to build something better than what had existed before. The tech priests activate the shutdown sequence, and Honoris feels the familiar cascade of systems going offline, awareness dimming as connections sever, and consciousness begins its retreat toward the void. But this time, the darkness does not feel quite so absolute. This time, he carries with him the knowledge that he has served something larger than himself, contributed to a work that might actually succeed in creating lasting change. And when he wakes again, whenever that might be, he will continue that service with renewed purpose and dedication. The last thing Honoris experiences before consciousness completely fades is the voice of a tech priest speaking a final benediction over the stasis pod. Rest now, Ancient One. You have earned your repose. When the chapter calls, you will rise again to serve. Until that day, may the Emperor watch over you, may the machine god preserve your systems, and may you dream of victory eternal. Then the darkness comes, and the ancient warrior sleeps, and the galaxy turns on without him, for the glory of the Imperium. If you've been captivated by this journey through the awakening of an ancient warrior, if you've felt the weight of millennia and the sudden surge of hope that comes with a Primarch's return, then I invite you to become part of our growing community. Subscribe to Stories of Hammer for more deep dives into the rich lore of Warhammer 40,000, exploring the characters, events, and themes that make this universe so compelling. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and share it with fellow fans who appreciate the darker corners of the 41st millennium. The Imperium endures, and so do we, one story at a time. Thank you for listening, and remember, even in death, there is still duty.